My name is Claire Whitmore, and until a year ago, my life seemed like something out of a dream. I had a loving husband, a successful career in architecture, and a circle of friends I thought I could count on forever. I lived in the heart of San Francisco in a beautiful penthouse apartment that I designed myself. Everything was perfect, or so I believed. But you never really know when the ground beneath your feet is about to give way. My husband, Daniel, was the kind of man who could light up any room with his charm. Tall, intelligent, and successful in his own right as a marketing executive, he had swept me off my feet in college. We had been together for nearly 10 years. Everyone who knew us called us the perfect couple. Yet, beneath that polished exterior, something dark was brewing. I first noticed it when Daniel started working late more often. He claimed he had client meetings and important presentations, and I, like a fool, believed him. I even brought him dinner to the office once, only to find the lights off and the entire floor empty. He later brushed it off as a last-minute cancellation. My instincts screamed something was off, but love often clouds judgment. Then came the strange texts, messages he quickly deleted, the locked phone, and the weekend, business trips, that had no paper trail. Still, I said nothing. Until that one evening. It was raining, I remember, because the drops tapping against the glass windows matched the anxiety in my chest. Daniel was supposed to be in Chicago. I had stayed home, curled on the couch, watching old movies. Out of sheer curiosity, or maybe desperation, I opened his laptop, something I never did before. It wasn't password protected. Emails flooded the screen, messages between Daniel and my best friend, Vanessa. My heart stopped. They weren't even careful. Words like, "Last night was amazing," and "Can't wait till she's out of the way," blazed across the screen like fire on paper. I felt like I was suffocating. Vanessa, my best friend since high school. She had stood next to me on my wedding day, toasted to our love, and cried tears of joy when we bought our first home. The betrayal was too deep for words. The next day, I confronted Daniel. I expected guilt, regret, maybe even fear. But he didn't even flinch. "Claire," he said calmly, "you're too predictable. Too focused on work. You stopped being exciting a long time ago." I stood there, mouth agape, trying to comprehend the man I once loved. "We're done," I whispered. He chuckled. "Not quite. You see, the apartment, the savings, the car, they're all in my name. Good luck proving anything." That night, I packed a small bag, walked out of my home, and disappeared into the storm. But as I wandered the streets, soaked and broken, I made myself a silent promise. They think they've won. They think they'll crumble, but they have no idea what's coming. The world felt like it was crumbling beneath me, but strangely, I felt a flicker of peace walking away from the wreckage of my life. My emotions churned, grief, anger, shame, but under it all, something new was being born. A hunger, not for justice, but for revenge. I moved in with my cousin Mia on the other side of the city. She was the only one who hadn't been tainted by Daniel's charm or Vanessa's lies. She didn't ask for details at first, just opened her door and gave me space to breathe. When the tears stopped and the trembling faded, I told her everything. Mia didn't gasp. She didn't say, "I'm so sorry." Instead, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Then we destroy them." Daniel and Vanessa thought I had walked away with nothing. What they didn't know was that I had access to more than just the apartment. Daniel may have put the property in his name, but my name was still on joint accounts, emails, and files stored on our cloud. Mia and I dug deep. We found hundreds of messages between them, plans, lies, receipts for hotels, gifts, and even transfers of company money to cover vacations. Daniel had been siphoning money from his employer's marketing budget to fund his affair. But it wasn't enough to catch him cheating. I needed to ruin his life the way he tried to ruin mine. I took time off from my job. My boss, thankfully, was understanding. I told her I needed a break and left on good terms. What I didn't say was that I was about to reinvent myself. I hit the gym. I changed my wardrobe. I took workshops in public speaking, digital strategy, and even some acting classes. Not for fun, but to learn how to become someone new. Someone sharper, more cunning. I began freelancing under a new name. My skills in architecture and interior design were in high demand. The money flowed, my independence returned, and through it all, Mia stood beside me, fueling my mission. With my savings and freelancing income, I created a brand new alias, Elena Ross, a high-end property investor with a sharp eye and sharp tongue. It wasn't hard. A new look, a new voice, new designer clothes. No one recognized Claire Whitmore anymore. Why Elena? Because Elena was fearless. Elena was ruthless. Elena was the woman Daniel would never see coming. Daniel's company, Nova Edge, was launching a new luxury condo project, something he was leading personally. Through a connection Mia helped me build in the investor community, I arranged a meeting between Elena Ross and Nova Edge. And that's when I saw him again for the first time in 6 months. Daniel stood in the conference room, tanned, smug, completely unaware of who I really was. "Elena," he said, flashing that charming smile, "welcome to Nova Edge." I returned the smile. "Let's build something beautiful together," I said. Inside, I was screaming. But on the outside, I was calm. Because Daniel had no idea, this wasn't about building. This was about burning it all down. Sitting across from Daniel in the Nova Edge boardroom, I had to steady my breath. He looked exactly the same, flawless suit, arrogant confidence, that sly smile that once melted me. But now, all I could think was how could I have ever loved you? He had no clue who I was. The hair, the posture, the voice, every detail of Elena Ross was calculated to be unlike Claire. He even complimented me on my unusual accent. Mia had trained me well. She sat in the back of the room pretending to be my assistant, quietly watching and recording everything. I proposed to Daniel a potential investment into Nova Edge's next big luxury project, one that would change the skyline. I told him I represented a silent international partner ready to pour in millions, but only if I had full creative input on the design. He loved the idea. He was drooling over the chance to secure a multi-million-dollar investor. He had no idea that the investor didn't exist. I was the storm inside his golden castle. In the following weeks, I spent more time with Daniel. Every meeting was a test. I smiled while listening to him lie, exaggerate, and flatter. It was disgusting, but I had to pretend. Pretend that I wasn't watching his world from inside, brick by brick. Then came the dinner meeting, the one that was supposed to seal the deal. Daniel picked a high-end restaurant. He tried to impress me, tried to charm Elena, the way he used to charm Claire. His eyes lingered too long. His hand brushed mine, by accident. It was sickening, but I played along. "Tell me," he said, sipping his wine, "why is a woman like you not taken?" I tilted my head, smiling like a lioness. Oh, I was, once. But he made the mistake of thinking I was weak. Daniel laughed, clueless. While I kept Daniel distracted, Mia handled Vanessa. She created a fake online persona, posing as a wealthy art curator, and offered Vanessa an opportunity to showcase her work in a prestigious private gallery. Vanessa, ever thirsty for validation, took the bait. She met Mia posing as Isabel Grant, and shared everything. Her affair, how Daniel was planning to leave, his dumb ex, how they had cheated the system. We recorded it all. Audio, video, screenshots. I had what I needed, proof of Daniel embezzling company funds, using them to fund his affair, and Vanessa admitting to it. With Mia's help, I prepared a full anonymous report and sent it to Nova Edge's board of directors. I also leaked certain parts to a trusted journalist friend under a fake alias. But I wasn't done yet. Not before Daniel saw my face. Daniel called me for a final pitch meeting. He wanted to introduce me to the company's CEO to finalize the deal. I arrived early, and when he walked in, smiling like the king of the world, I turned to him and slowly removed my sunglasses. His face changed instantly. "Claire," he choked. "No, Daniel," I said coolly, "Elena Ross." He staggered back. "What is this? What the hell is going on?" I leaned in. "This is what it looks like when a woman you betrayed decides not to cry, but to rise." He reached for my arm. I pulled away. "You don't get to touch me ever again." At that moment, his assistant burst into the room. She looked panicked. "Daniel, you need to come. There's news. The board wants to speak with you. And the press is calling." Daniel left the room in a daze, his kingdom collapsing around him. And me, I walked out with my head high. News of Daniel's downfall spread like wildfire. The leaked reports were everywhere. Headlines screamed, "CEO under fire for embezzlement and scandal," and every news channel was replaying the same audio, Vanessa's voice laughing about how they manipulated the system. Nova Edge's stock plummeted within hours. Daniel tried to keep it together, but the cracks were too deep. The board suspended him pending an internal investigation. Investors pulled out. Lawsuits loomed. The king had lost his crown. And I was watching it all from a quiet cafe, sipping coffee with Mia. We didn't need applause. His destruction was enough. Unlike Daniel, she didn't go silent. She fought back, spreading lies online, claiming I was a stalker, a bitter ex trying to ruin their lives. She even created fake profiles to attack me, calling me obsessed and mentally unstable. I expected it. That's why I had saved the most powerful card for last. I sent a package to Vanessa's gallery, an anonymous envelope containing screenshots, videos, and a detailed breakdown of her involvement in Daniel's crimes. But I didn't send it to her. I sent it to the art community, her clients, and sponsors. Her elite world turned its back on her. She lost gallery deals. Her exhibits were cancelled. One by one, her name was removed from upcoming events. She posted a tearful video online, claiming she was innocent. But the comments weren't kind. People had seen too much. The internet doesn't forgive easily. He resigned from Nova Edge claiming personal reasons. He thought walking away would save him from the damage. But the lawsuits had already begun. Former employees he fired unfairly now had the courage to speak. The IRS opened a case. His assets were frozen. Mia and I watched as his life unraveled completely. And for the first time, I slept peacefully. One evening, I returned home to find a note slipped under my door. I know what you did. Meet me. One last time. It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting. Daniel. I went. Not because I feared him, but because I wanted to face him fully broken. He was waiting in a small bar downtown, a place we once went to as Claire and Daniel. Now it was Elena and the wreckage of a man she used to love. You ruined me, he said bitterly. His face was tired, eyes hollow. No, I replied. You ruined yourself. I just made sure the world saw it. His voice cracked. I loved you once. You lied to me every day of that love, I said. And you would have done it again if I hadn't stopped you. He didn't deny it. As I stood up to leave, he said something that stopped me for a second. You were always stronger than me. I looked at him for the last time. No, Daniel, I just finally believed it. Mia and I started a foundation afterward, one that helped women recover from financial and emotional abuse. Survivors reached out to me with stories far worse than mine. My pain became purpose. Daniel and Vanessa, they faded into silence, forgotten by the same world they tried to impress. The grand launch of Eleonora's company, Aureole, was the talk of the city. What had started as sketches hidden in dusty drawers had now blossomed into a radiant symbol of resilience and artistry. But beneath the glimmer of champagne glasses and flashing cameras, a storm was gathering, one that would sweep through her past and leave nothing untouched. Eleonora stood near the stage, her dress flowing like liquid gold. Guests buzzed around her, praising her vision. She smiled graciously, but her mind was elsewhere, on what was to come. Suddenly, the doors to the hall opened. And he walked in. Adrian, looking confused, slightly worn, and undeniably out of place, he stood frozen for a moment. Someone must have invited him, or maybe he came out of curiosity, ego, or regret. Their eyes met. For a second, it felt like time reversed, back to a day when her world revolved around his attention. But not anymore. She stepped up to the microphone and smiled at the audience. Tonight is not just about fashion. It's about transformation, about rising when others expect you to break. As applause erupted, Adrian's face stiffened. Eleonora walked off the stage and made her way directly to him. Every step she took was calm, elegant, and full of purpose. I didn't expect to see you here, she said, her voice cool. I got an invite, he muttered. I didn't know it was your company. Eleonora tilted her head. Of course not. You always underestimated what I could be without you. I came to say I was wrong. Eleonora chuckled, but it wasn't bitter. It was strong. You were. But it no longer matters. He shifted uncomfortably. Cassie, she left. Took everything. Turns out she was more interested in the money than me. Eleonora's face remained unreadable. I lost the house. My job. Everything's falling apart. You built your life on lies and vanity, Adrian. It's only fitting that it crumbled, she replied gently but firmly. He looked at her like a man who had seen a ghost of the life he could have had. I don't want pity, Adrian. I want peace. And I've found it. With that, she turned to leave. But before she disappeared into the crowd, she looked back one last time. I hope one day, you understand the value of a heart that loved you unconditionally. Goodbye. Adrian's world had collapsed like a house of cards. After Eleonora walked away from him at the launch, he left quietly, alone, unnoticed. The grand lights of the venue faded in his rearview mirror, replaced by the grim silence of his rented apartment. Cassie, the woman he had left everything for, had vanished with his savings and left him buried in debt. He was no longer the successful executive he once bragged about being. His phone barely rang anymore. His so-called friends had distanced themselves. And in the dark echo of his apartment, the only thing louder than the ticking clock was the sound of his own regret. Meanwhile, Eleora flourished. Aureole had not only become a brand, it had become a movement. Women wrote to her daily, sharing how her story gave them strength. Social media was flooded with her designs, and magazines called her the phoenix of fashion. But despite all her success, Eleora never gloated. Her revenge had never been about destruction, it had been about rebirth. She was on the cover of Vogue. She was invited to Paris Fashion Week. She was featured in a documentary titled, She Rose. And with every win, she stayed true to who she was, graceful, humble, powerful. One quiet evening, Eleora received a letter. Handwritten. No sender name, but she recognized the handwriting. Adrian, I don't deserve your time. But I wanted to thank you. You showed me what love meant, and I threw it away. I see that now. I hope you find the happiness you once gave me. Not because you owe me forgiveness, but because you deserve the world. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. No anger, no sorrow, just closure. Months passed. One day, while speaking at a women's empowerment summit, a journalist asked her, if you could change anything about your past, would you? Eleora smiled. Not a thing, she said. Every scar, every betrayal, it all shaped me into the woman I am today. You don't grow in comfort. You grow in the fire. And I burned, so I could rise. The room erupted in applause. Somewhere far away, Adrian watched the clip on his cracked phone screen, sitting in a crowded subway train, surrounded by strangers who didn't know his name. Tears welled up in his eyes, not out of anger, but understanding. He had lost something rare. But Eleora had found herself. 6 months later, Eleora stood at the heart of Paris Fashion Week, beneath the dazzling lights of the Grand Palais. Her models gracefully walked the runway in a collection that whispered of freedom, fire, and rebirth, each stitch a silent echo of her journey. As the show ended, the crowd erupted into a standing ovation. Eleora stepped forward in a flowing, deep red gown, symbolic of both strength and vulnerability. She bowed gently, her eyes glistening with emotion. Backstage, reporters scrambled for interviews. One of them asked, how did it feel to be underestimated, and then conquer the world? Eleora paused. I wasn't conquering the world, she said softly. I was reclaiming myself. Meanwhile, Adrian now worked at a mid-tier company, no fancy title, no grand office. Every day, he clocked in quietly, kept to himself, and carried the weight of his mistakes like a shadow. His face had aged from the stress. The charm that once swept Cassie off her feet had faded, and so had his ego. Occasionally, he would search Eleora's name online, not out of obsession, but in awe. He watched her interviews, admired her strength, and smiled sadly, knowing she was never his to begin with, she had always belonged to herself. One evening, as he walked past a bookstore, a window display caught his eye. Reborn, From Betrayal to Brilliance, by Eleora Hayes. He stood there, motionless, staring at her name. Inside the store, he picked up a copy and opened the first page. To every woman who was ever told she's too old, too broken, or not enough. You're not too late, you're just getting started. Adrian sat down on a bench nearby and read for hours, flipping pages filled with wisdom, pain, love, and resilience. It wasn't a book of revenge, it was a book of freedom. And for the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him. Later that year, Eleora was invited to Harvard as a guest speaker on resilience in entrepreneurship. She shared her story, not with bitterness, but with grace. She talked about failure, ageism, betrayal, and how she turned it all into fuel. A young woman from the audience stood up and asked, "What do you say to the people who broke you?" Eleora smiled gently. "I don't say anything," she said. "Because my silence screams louder than their insults ever could. I chose to rebuild." That's the loudest response of all. Applause roared across the room. Outside the hall, her team greeted her with flowers and happy tears. She wasn't just a designer now, she was a movement. That night, as she sipped tea on her balcony, looking at the Paris skyline, a quiet peace settled over her. She didn't need validation, she didn't need revenge, because she had found something far more powerful than either. Redemption. 1 year later, the world had embraced Eleora Hayes as a symbol of strength and elegance. Her name was no longer just associated with fashion, it was power, purpose, and a message. She had built an empire not on spite, but on survival and self-worth. She had just wrapped a powerful TED Talk titled, The Art of Starting Again. Her inbox was full: offers, collaborations, invitations to mentor young designers and women who were starting over. But that night, as she walked through the quiet streets of Florence on a solo trip, she realized something was still waiting for her, not on the outside, but within. Love, not the kind that needed validation or wore expensive suits, but the kind that came softly, patiently, and genuinely. Enter Luca. She met him at a quiet gallery. He was an artist, rugged in spirit but warm in the eyes. He admired her work, not her fame. He asked her about her thoughts on light and texture, not her past relationships or scandals. He didn't flinch when she talked about her age or the battles she'd fought. Instead, he said, "You are art, Eleonora. Every scar, every shade, a masterpiece in motion." They began to meet, first as strangers, then as soul mirrors. There was no rush, no pressure, just mutual respect and unexpected laughter. He cooked her dinner one night in his small Italian apartment and said, "You've given the world so much. Let someone give to you now." And for the first time, Eleonora let her guard down. Not because she needed someone to complete her, but because she was already complete, and now, she could simply choose love. Adrian, meanwhile, he now volunteered at a community shelter. Life had humbled him, and for once, he listened more than he spoke. One day, he saw Eleonora's face on a magazine in a waiting room, smiling, glowing, at peace. And he smiled too. There were no bitter regrets now. Just a quiet acceptance that sometimes, losing someone isn't punishment, it's a lesson. And sometimes, it's exactly what both people need to become who they're meant to be. She sat on the balcony in Florence, writing in her journal. A letter she never intended to publish, but needed to write. Dear younger me, thank you for surviving every heartbreak, every insult, every breakdown. You made me who I am today. You were never too old. You were never too late. And you were always worthy of a new beginning. Love, Eleonora. She closed the book, smiled, and joined Luca, who was waiting with coffee and stories under the golden Italian sun. Not a fairy tale ending, a real one, where healing doesn't come from revenge, but from choosing yourself every single day.